author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
President Vladimir Putin has invaded Ukraine, and yet responses from globalist leaders appear to be following an old playbook that has proven in the past to be less than successful. Now, Putin knows this playbook because it's the same response that has been used time and time again: sanctions and recriminations. But has the Russian president prepared for this in advance? And does he have a strategy in place that can help him wait it all out while the West fiddles along? Now, the world is watching on as President Putin does what many experts thought undoable or unthinkable. He is engaged in a modern large-scale land war in Europe. For weeks, we've heard from the Biden administration that Putin was going to invade. The nation's intelligence agencies were uniform in presenting the idea that this event could actually happen. So congratulations to them. Team Biden was right. But that begs the bigger question, perhaps the biggest question of them all. They knew it was coming. The might of US government analysis said it was going to happen, and not a single solitary thing was done to actually try and stop it before it began. Well, other than sending Vice President Kamala Harris to Europe to lecture foreign leaders and allies about what war actually is, and some would argue that she herself has no idea. And that was what the Biden administration was doing. Now, to many of us on the outside, that seems that the White House was sitting on its collective hands. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Now, on today's episode, we're joined by defense expert Dave Patterson to unravel the Biden administration's response and what might happen next with Vladimir Putin, and also where might the Russian leader turn his greedy eyes next. We'll be talking financial impacts with economics guru Andrew Moran and discover why the mainstream media is determined to spin the already abysmal economy into something that came about only due to the war in Ukraine. We have a special Say What segment coming up with longtime host of this here Liberty Nation Radio, Tim Donner. And last, but by no means least, we'll be talking liberty with Scott D. Cosenza, examining the hottest cases of the week and how they impact your liberty. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Dalton, Georgia on WBAC 1230 AM. Thank you for being here. You're appreciated. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Let's dive right in. Vladimir Putin's troops are in Ukraine, and President Joe Biden is using sanctions to try and hold back the Russian bear. But will they do any good? And more importantly, what happens next? Well, to help us answer these questions, we're joined once again by former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller, Dave Patterson. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Glad to be
Dave,
with you.
What's your professional assessment of the situation as it stands?
Well, the worst has happened. Putin has viewed the Biden administration and NATO and the EU as not a particularly strong impediment against him doing what he said he was going to do back in July. And more recently in a speech, he said he was going to recover the Ukraine because it rightfully belonged to Russia. And so he started that process.
I mean, there's been a lot of talk about where does he go from here and what happens next. And I think more precisely, where will Putin go next? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that he would like to recover all of the former Soviet Union. I believe that he's going to have a very difficult time, but nonetheless, he will find some pretext to do whatever he wants to do, just like he did in Ukraine. The Baltics are particularly good targets. Whether he would do that and risk a Article 5 response from NATO, well, that remains to be seen. But there are other places that he might eye as being appealing. Kazakhstan, for example, where he just recently intervened in the Kazakhstani problems.
Yeah, the Article 5 there that you mentioned from the NATO treaty, that's the Musketeers article, I believe it's known as all for one and one for all. So if one NATO member is attacked, then all NATO members respond. Now, of course, Ukraine isn't a NATO member, so he can really operate with fairly impunity from NATO, can't he, at the moment?
Uh, from his perspective, yes, absolutely. I mean, he has created the pretext of rescuing ethnic Russians from the clutches of the Zelensky regime. And he has created this mythology around that. He has made this mythology a truth to the Russian people, and that's what he's based his invasion on.
Okay, so at the moment, it seems that world leaders are looking at sanctions. They're applying sanctions already. They're talking about cutting off various ties. Now, can Vladimir Putin and his army and his government, can they withstand the various sanctions and things? Or is this something that they've likely prepared for?
I believe that his entrees to China is part of the preparation for withstanding the economic sanctions that have come, as we have said in Liberty Nation, too late and too few. But nonetheless, he's counting, I believe, on China to bolster his financial position, so that the sanctions are not as great an impact as they might otherwise have been.
Yeah, I believe there's a recent deal being made whilst Vladimir Putin was visiting the Winter Olympics in Beijing, and it was an energy deal worth 30 years worth of supply or something. So I think from that point of view, there'll certainly be a lot of dollars or yuan flowing into Moscow. But you mentioned Kazakhstan earlier. Now, I only knew this was significant because of what you told me personally. But could you explain that to our listeners, please?
Well, there were numerous riots that took place ostensibly because of the lifting of the cap on gas in Kazakhstan, and particularly liquid natural gas, which is what most Kazakhs use in their cars. And consequently, there were a lot of riots. And the Russian military came in under the pretext of peacekeeping and establishing order, and they landed about 2,500 troops, as I recall, in order to do that.
And what was the response of the West to this?
Well, we were monitoring the situation, and that we had strong words condemning any further incursion by Russia into Kazakhstan.
So no real response then would be
no real response. No, and quite frankly, I would, in one of my articles, I mentioned this is probably a good thing, because it is what was Biden going to do actually, and so sitting in the grandstands watching it play out was probably the better part of valor for him.
Well, let's talk about Joe Biden for a moment. I think it's fairly clear to many people, if not those in the Fourth Estate, the American Fourth Estate, that this probably wouldn't have happened if Joe Biden were not president and Donald Trump were. What's your take on that?
I think there's a very strong case that this would not have happened if Donald Trump were president of the United States right now. And the fact is that what Donald Trump brought to geopolitics was doubt. Nobody could predict what he would do or what he would think or what he would say. And you know, when it comes to weapons, doubt is a fairly effective weapon.
It seems that he was just a little bit crazy enough to go all out on things. And that's really what you want opposition nations to be thinking, that we don't know how far this person would go. Now, so far, we haven't had huge amount of response from the administration, other than, of course, they're going to be looking for a united response. They're looking at different sanctions, cutting off different political avenues. How far could they go if they really wanted?
Well, I think the United States and the Western allies could first and foremost stop all commercial traffic into and out of Russia. They could start the process of stopping all markets and all trade with Russia. And after a while, it'll be kind of tough for China to pick up the 1.6 trillion GDP of Russia.
Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Later in the show, we're talking liberty with Scott DeCosenza, discussing the hot cases that impact you and your liberties. But up next, we ask how Biden's warning of expensive times ahead for the American people is being manipulated by the media, and whether the public is buying what the Fourth Estate has on offer. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The president warns that with this new conflict in Ukraine, Americans are going to feel the financial heat, pointing out that defending freedom will have costs. But for those of you with a nose for spin, it may seem like Joe Biden is trying to shift the responsibility for his economic performance onto Vladimir Putin. Now, to pass the numbers, we're fortunate to have with us Liberty Nation's economics correspondent, Mr. Andrew Moran. Thanks for being here, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, Andrew, the president says defending freedom will have costs. He's talking about gas and energy prices, right? But even before this situation developed, weren't Americans already paying more for Biden's policies?
Oh, absolutely. It's just this has become the theme of the whole Biden presidency. He's trying to find scapegoats for every single problem facing his administration. On the economic front, when inflation is at a 4-decade high, he's trying to blame everybody else for it. He's blaming mom and pop gasoline stores. He's blaming big meat. He's blaming Jerome Powell, which I agree, but he's blaming for the wrong reasons. And now he's blaming Vladimir Putin. Maybe perhaps you should give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was saying, defending freedom will have greater costs than all the Americans are paying now. So perhaps he just misspoke, But yeah, so Americans are paying a lot more than they already have. It's just going to exacerbate moving forward.
Well, I would rebut giving him the benefit of the doubt there, because I noticed in a recent article on CBS News that the whole piece, it talked about why costs would rise, how it would impact Americans, but made not a single mention of the 40-year high inflation or already super high gas prices. And now we see this being repeated by the rest of the media. Do they think people will actually fall for it?
Yeah, I think if you're glued to, let's say, CNN or NBC News and you're reading the New York Times, yeah, you're going to believe it. It's that old adage, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. If this tidbit is repeated constantly at the 9 o'clock primetime news hour and on segments on CNN that, inflation was showing signs of easing before the Ukraine crisis, if you look at the latest data, more people are going to buy that. It's this appeal to authority fallacy when they're saying, these people said inflation was easing. Although I didn't feel it, perhaps it was easing. So now you have that excuse of the Ukraine crisis adding a lot of pressure, especially on the energy front. So, I think a specific portion of the public probably will want to believe it, who want Democrats to remain in power. But the reality situation is that, nothing was easy. If you look at the last CPI report in January, nothing was easy. Everything was up across the board, except I think men's pants and audio equipment. And if you want to dive into what those products are for, you can have that at Mark.
I'm just going shopping now for pants and audio equipment. Now, I got to point out here, Andrew, that you and I spoke about this before recording, but one of these articles mentioned that gas could hit $4 a gallon because of the Ukraine crisis. Now, I think I'm correct in this. You did talk to me about this before. In California, it's already $4 a gallon, right? And around the country, it's the national pump price is $3.54.
Yeah. Well, the national average in the United States is $3.54, but in California, the average is around $4.40, and some places in the state are paying as high as $5 a gallon already. So the record high prices are slamming in California. But there are a variety of reasons for it. You have the high regulations. Demand is immense in California because they have a lack of a public transit system. You have all these taxes and all this green energy transition. So yeah, the California pays the most in the nation today.
So for California, this Russian situation is a good thing, right? Because it will bring gas down to $4 a gallon, according to the left-wing media. Right, let's talk about inflation for a moment, Andrew. Now, as you point out, the bods in DC, they said that inflation would begin to ease, coincidentally, I'm sure, just before the midterm elections. Now, these people, they're people who are apparently in the know. Now, how is the Ukraine situation going to impact their assessment?
Well, well, the energy is the biggest thing because Russia supplies a massive amount of energy to the world. So Ukraine is an important transit point for this natural gas shipments. But I think when it comes to the United States, the key point is that the United States is going to ship a lot more natural gas to Europe. Right now, Europe imports about 60% of its liquefied natural gas from the United States. Now, if you look at the latest EIA Storage Weekly report, it shows that the natural gas numbers are actually below the 5-year average, which is, I think, is around 1 trillion cubic feet, something in that area. So if more natural gas is going to be shipped to Europe, there's going to be less at home to consume. The other issue is that not a lot of natural gas production is happening right now, whether it's because of regulatory uncertainty or companies are just trying to maintain a strong balance sheet. There's a lot of debate over that. But overall, if you're having this energy crisis, and Europe, which already suffered from an energy crisis before this Ukraine debacle, America's going to hurt, but mostly they're going to hurt in their wallets because natural gas obviously is going to spike. Crude oil is going to spike. I mean, you're already seeing it now. There's expectation that it's going to hit $100 a barrel soon. Brent is at 98. The WTI contract is at $92. The U.S. is now a net importer of oil. It's no longer a net exporter. So this Ukraine crisis, it's bringing a lot of the fault lines to the front. You're seeing all the problems that were festering before. Now they're being exacerbated by the Ukraine crisis. And one more thing, food is also a critical issue in this topic because Russia is now the world's largest wheat producer. Ukraine is the 4th largest wheat producer. Problem with Russia is that they have an export tax, so it costs a lot of farmers to ship their wheat products. So that's going to add even more pressures to inflation. Back home, even a guy like James Bullard, he's the president of the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank. He said inflation spiraling out of control. All this issue now is going to impact the Federal Reserve and how it's going to move on interest rates. Are they going to agree to a 50 basis point hike at the March FOMC meeting? Are they going to keep it at 25? Are they going to have a full percentage point by July? There's so many factors that are going to impact the United States. It's really, really riveting to monitor how the financial market's going to react, how the Federal Reserve is going to react, and how public policymakers back home are going to react.
It almost makes you wish for the days of energy and food independence. Andrew Moran, thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. Remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation from 2 to 3 p.m. on Sunday on KBKW 103.5 FM, 1450 AM, the talk of Grays Harbor. Now, coming up later is Hate Crime Just Thought Crime by Another Name. Next up, we have a special Say What segment with Tim Donner. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And now we have with us longtime host of this here show and Liberty Nation senior political analyst, Tim Donner, with a special Say What segment. Thanks for being here, Tim, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And as we kick off our post-Valentine's Day, pre-St. Patty's Day edition of Say What, we are left to wonder exactly what it will take for Hillary Clinton to leave the stage. I mean, here's a woman who ran twice for president, went down to arguably the most humiliating, ignominious defeat in American political history, then blamed everyone but herself for it. Now comes Special Counsel John Durham, charging that an operative in the employ of Hillary's 2016 campaign hacked into Trump's computers both during the campaign and when he was in the White House. And of course, as always, Hillary did, as the Clintons always do, deflect, shift the blame, and then, incredibly, make a speech sounding like another campaign kickoff.
We can't get distracted, whether it's by the latest culture war nonsense or some new right-wing lie on Fox or Facebook. By the way, they've been coming after me again lately, in case you might have noticed. It's funny, the more trouble Trump gets into, the wilder the charges and conspiracy theories about me seem to get. Republicans are defending coup plotters. They're getting awfully close to actual malice in their attacks.
So gracious, so inspiring, so nuanced. Let's break that down for a moment, shall we? Hillary's culture war nonsense is exactly what has the Democrats tanking and reeling nationally. So, of course, she is, as always, completely tone deaf. And it was John Durham, after 3 years of investigation, and not Trump, who made the allegation. And sounding ever the lawyer, she uses the term actual malice. Is she planning to sue Fox or Trump or the entire basket of deplorables, class action suit? Of course, Hillary may well think, hey, it took Biden 3 times to land in the Oval Office, and if he can make it, I certainly can. And really, who can argue with that? Especially with Democrats so bereft of presidential timber that Hillary Clinton would actually be mentioned seriously as a potential candidate. What does that say about the Democratic Party? Meanwhile, with Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine now official, the lengthy history of lying by the Russians in general and Vladimir Putin in particular is revealing itself once more. Here's a one-stop shop of Russian declarations and promises in the wake of the largest military mobilization since World War II, delivered by Anatoly Antonov, Russian ambassador to the U.S. on ABC's Sunday morning show, 3 days before all the promises he made were broken.
There is no innovation and there is no such plans. It was fixed in Russian documents that we conveyed to our American friends in State Department. Russia has publicly declared its readiness to continue the diplomatic efforts to resolve all outstanding issues. Each state has a right to protect its boundary and border. Russian troops are on a sovereign Russian territory. We don't threaten anyone.
There is no invasion. We stand ready to continue diplomacy. Then he says they'll protect their boundary, which they then summarily expanded by effectively annexing 2 Ukrainian provinces 1 day later, and then the invasion a couple days after that. But no, they don't threaten anyone. The ultimate exercise in gaslighting and lying. Make no mistake, Putin's intent is no less than to reclaim the Russian and Soviet empire. And the weakness of America's 46th president is providing him ample opportunity to kick that project into another gear. And GOP Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas said, Putin is maximizing the hold he has over much of Western Europe.
Too many of these European nations have made themselves beholden to Russian gas, and therefore Russia has leverage over them. If we wanted to truly punish Russia for invading Ukraine, and maybe as important, if we want to send a signal to China about what would happen were they to invade Taiwan in the months or years ahead, it's obvious the kind of sanctions we should impose. We should sanction Russian oil. We should sanction their minerals and their mining sector. We should sanction their biggest banks. We should impose secondary dollar sanctions on them as well. We should remove them from the international financial system. That would send the signal to China that we mean business.
And the chances of Biden doing all of that, well, I would not hazard a guess. And it's yet another symptom of Biden weakness, this time exploited by the Russian strongman. But Biden's problems at home may be even worse, with inflation becoming such a huge issue that even longtime liberal Democrat strategist Donna Brazile went on ABC and had to admit just how bad it is.
I mean, inflation is robbing us of our joy, stealing our hard-earned wages. I can't go to the grocery store without complaining about the price of eggs and bacon. I mean, a pound of bacon is almost $9. Jesus.
No, not Jesus. Biden and his fellow Democrats, who are in free fall in the eyes of the American people. One poll after another shows it. And you know, it's one thing to be ridiculed by your opponents, but quite another when it's done by one of the most famous pundits on your own side, Bill Maher.
When normal people read that San Francisco has basically legalized shoplifting, they think Democrats have gone nuts. It's not my fault that the party of FDR and JFK is turning into the party of LOL and WTF. Members of Congress tweeting things like cancel rent, cancel mortgage, and no more policing or incarceration, declaring that capitalism is slavery, canceling Lincoln and Dr. Seuss, teaching children they're oppressors and math is racist, making Mr. Potato Head gender neutral. Democrats have become a parody of themselves, just making rules to make rules because it makes you feel like you're a better person.
Well, Mark, I don't know about you, but I just feel like a better person for hearing all those swell ideas from the far left. Cleansed even. How about you?
Actually, Tim, cleansed perhaps isn't the word I'd personally use. Now, many thanks for being here and sharing. And don't touch that dial. Coming up next, we're talking liberty with Scott Cosenza. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And welcome back to our special Talking Liberty segment on Liberty Nation Radio, where we examine the cases and the stories that impact your rights. As ever, we're joined by Liberty Nation's legal affairs analyst and host of the excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire. Welcome back, Scott.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
So, Scott, the first thing I want to talk about is the Ahmaud Arbery verdict. Now, many people think this was over months ago, but not so, because the three gentlemen in question who have now been found guilty have been found guilty of civil rights violations under a hate crime. So they were back in court for hate crime. Give me your take on this, Scott.
Yeah, the McMichaels, father and son, and Mr. Bryant, who were found guilty of murdering Ahmaud Arbery in state court, have now been found guilty of federal civil rights violations against him. And I thought it was important to talk about, Mark, because it's a thought crime. The charges concern whether or not their killing of their illegal killing of Arbery was motivated by racial bias. That's what the trial was to determine. And they found that it did. And the evidence they used to find that were years and sometimes decades old conversations they had and utterances they made to prove that somehow that they had animus against Mr. Arbery, even though none of those statements were about Mr. Arbery. So if 7 years ago they used a racial epithet in a text message, somehow that becomes then relevant in this trial. And I just thought it was important to bring to people's attention because I think too few people know. And I think it's an outrageous position that the government holds and can get away with, that, you know, speech in one instance is somehow attributable in a negative criminal evidentiary implication to some separate set of facts years later or even decades later.
Well, this is not America is not the only country going with these hate crime trials and hate crime laws at the moment. We've seen plenty of video evidence over the last 18 to 24 months of police officers in Australia and in the United Kingdom going to people's houses, asking to talk about why they sent a message, pointing out that they have not committed a crime, but asking about why they tweeted a certain thing to find out, and I quote here, the thought process.
It is really scary.
What's the legal basis for prosecuting under a hate crime, as it were? Because the three men in question, they've been found guilty. They've been sentenced to prison for a very long time, as they should be for committing an illegal murder. But now they're back in court. Why? What's the purpose of it?
Well, it seems like a piling on. These civil rights violations were initially put in place for this kind of thing. What I mean by this kind of thing is whites killing blacks, murdering blacks in the South, but then having those crimes not be addressed by prosecutors in their jurisdictions because of racism and the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. So there was good intentions, one would say, to put these laws into place, but then they're used, especially in the current times, I think, when the precursors for their imposition in the first place never occurred, which is to say that the state authorities did prosecute vigorously, so some may say too vigorously, the McMichaels and Mr. Bryant. So what then is the need for an additional federal charge? Well, I don't know, except to say that they wanted a piece of the hides of the the villain of the day, or the villains of the day.
I think it's an important question, Scott. But it seems important to me is, if, just for example, the three men in question had been found not guilty of the murder, would they then still could have been charged with a hate crime because it's coming from a separate?
Absolutely. We have a dual sovereignty system in the United States, and you can be guilty of criminal behavior for the same actions under federal law that you were acquitted or never charged with under state action. That's what allows that law in the first place. Now, there's a number of people like myself who think that is a preposterous violation of our prohibition against double jeopardy. And one of the sort of things to think about is, well, why wasn't this resolved sort of at the founding or whatever? And it's because we only had 3 federal crimes or 4 federal crimes at the founding of the United States of America. All the regular crimes, like homicide, for instance, were state level crimes. We had piracy, counterfeiting, and treason, I think, were the 3 that the Constitution mentions. So when the federal government has added most of these crimes relatively recently in our history, and we haven't really reckoned with that, I think, in a way that really gives meaning to the protection against double jeopardy when it comes from both state and federal prosecutors.
Okay, on to a more lighter topic, let's call it, Scott. I hear that there's a victory in the American Women's Football Leagues. Tell me more. We call
it soccer here in the States, Mark, and it is, I guess, a victory for them. I just thought it was a real a moment in time about our woke sort of existence now. The U.S. women's soccer team sued for gender discrimination or sex-based discrimination because they weren't paid as much as the men's team were, even though they were fantastically more successful in terms of their being champions. And the problem that sort of most of these stories don't report on is that they were paid literally every single penny they were owed under their contract. When they bargained for their contract and how they would be paid, they had the opportunity to be paid in the same basis that the men's team would be paid on, which is to say, as a sort of percentage of tickets sold or ratings and their position in the field of competitors. But they didn't opt for that, and instead they went with a more secure funding source, which paid them kind of like a regular salary with bonuses involved. And then later on, when their own performance and success revealed that they would have been paid much, much more money had they opted for the less secure version of that, the pay structure. Well, then it was, sour grapes, and they sued. But they're the ones who decided to go under a collective bargaining agreement with that payout structure, which I think it just feeds into the whole notion of, we have this thing where there's this pay gap that people talk about. But of course, as so many economists have laid bare, that gap it's not accounted for by gender discrimination. It's largely accounted for by the choices that women make in the workplace. For instance, to go for more security rather than a higher risk position. But somehow they're going to get paid millions of dollars, even still, Mark.
Well, congratulations to the women's team. I believe their last victory was a result of 3 own goals by the opposition player. And so that was a 3-0 victory for the American women's soccer team. And the last story I want to talk about today, Scott, it's the Gay Wedding Cake Redux 2.0, but this time it's personal and it's about website designs back in the Supreme Court. Give us the skinny on it, please.
Well, I might actually go this time. For people who, I'm sure a lot of people will remember the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. That was the case of a same-sex couple who wanted a baker. Is actually a put-up case, which is to say it didn't sort of occur naturally in the wild. This is a politically motivated case by somebody who wished to crush a Christian baker who didn't want to design cakes to celebrate same-sex weddings. Well, that they couldn't abide that. They took him to court, and basically he got fined by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission for not going ahead and giving this couple the cake that they wanted. Well, they went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not decide on the important free speech right that was implicated, which is to say, can the state compel that speech? The speech being whatever the icing and the text would have been on the cake, right? Instead, they found that there was some procedural issues that allowed them to rule in the case in another way. Well, that was unsatisfactory because, of course, those issues are still out there. And now they're coming back to the Supreme Court in the form of a website designer who wishes to use her talents to design wedding websites. So the popular thing now for a lot of couples is to create a website for their wedding where guest information and such can be posted. And she wishes to engage in this work and has basically sued for a declaratory relief that says, okay, I want to do this thing, but under the current rules, it seems like you're saying I can't do this thing. So what's the deal? Well, she lost in the district court. She lost in the 10th, I think it was the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And the case is called 303 Creative v. Alenis. And I think people are going to learn to know that case name because I think it's going to be a big case. And the current makeup of the court, Mark, I think suggests that this will be a free speech win. That's not a prediction, a firm prediction, but the last time the case went to the Supreme Court, 2 justices supported the free speech rights of the baker to bake his cake, Justice Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch. They're still on the court, obviously, and 2 justices opposed the right of the baker, and one of them was Justice Sotomayor, and the other was Justice Ginsburg, who obviously is no longer with us and replaced by Justice Barrett. So, and we have Kavanaugh on the court instead of Kennedy as well. So I think the court is poised to come out with a free speech favoring decision. I have to say, I hope that they do, because if the state can compel speech based on any number of, priorities they wish to enact, well, then I think it's the death of free speech.
Scott, we'll keep a close eye on this on the pages of Liberty Nation. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's almost it for this week on Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I want to thank our guests, Dave Patterson, Andrew Moran, Tim Donner, and Scott D. Cosenza. And of course, you, the listener, thank you for being here. And my final thought for this week is President Roosevelt. He once said, in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The worst thing you can do is nothing. Now, it seems that world leaders, including Vladimir Putin, are set on a path that will lead them to neither the good thing nor, in reality, anything. As ever, it will be the regular folk that suffer the consequences of decisions that we have no part in. You see, Biden's playbook is an open book. He's been using it for 50 long years. There are no surprises here. But Putin is also playing out his same old tricks, the same he's used time and time again, that the US refuses to look at history and to recognize that we're stuck in the same old game. And if we refuse once again to listen to our history, to recognize it for what it is, to see the patterns, and to understand the playbook that is literally being played out in front of us on a world stage, well, the sad reality is that we're doomed, as ever, to repeat it. There's nothing new under the sun. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and others.
I can do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it. Rock on. I'm gone.